Last week, Illumination released their 16th film, the Super Mario Galaxy movie, which means it's time to rank all 16 Illumination movies from the worst to the best. In last place, Hop. As a kid, I kind of enjoyed this movie, and it's fun to have an Easter movie, but the execution of the idea is not very good. Now, it's not a completely horrible movie, but at times it can be very hard to get through. There's a fun side plot about the chickens trying to take over Easter, and the pink berets are a fun element to the film, but the majority of the jokes in the film are lowbrow and or highly inappropriate for children. It feels like it's trying to be a kids movie, but also trying to be an edgy PG-13-ish comedy, while still being confined to a PG rating, and that brings it down. This is like when Pixar released Bug's Life right after the first Toy Story, a step down from the debut feature. Number 15, Sing 2. I have no idea who the audience for this movie is. It feels like the writer and director set out to make a U2 tribute film, but at the same time wanted a movie for their kids, and I don't think there's much overlap between the audience of 6-year-olds who are also fans of U2. Adults who are fans of U2 will likely be bored from the majority of it, and the kids won't really take anything away from the movie because they'll be too young to understand the heartfelt moments that are a tribute to U2. It's just an overall bizarre project that has little to no perfect audience demographic. Number 14, Sing. For the most part, there's really no reason for these characters to be animals. It's not like Zootopia, where the concept enhanced the world of the film. You could swap out all the characters for humans and it would be the same exact film. And clearly the writers did not do their research, because there's a K-pop group of red pandas who speak Japanese. The red panda is exclusively native to China. So we have a group of animals from China who speak Japanese and dance to music from South Korea. I don't know, seems kind of racist to have three very different Asian countries and cultures together into one stereotype. There's barely any plot, it just seems like an excuse to shove as many songs as possible into a 90-minute movie. It feels like being in the car with someone who can't decide on a radio station, and also the majority of the songs in the movie are not particularly child appropriate. It's not that funny, the story is not that engaging or heartfelt, it just feels generic. Number 13, Migration. It's DreamWorks The Croods, but with ducks. It doesn't really have much to offer in terms of story or characters, especially compared to other kids' films. It's definitely passable, and at times there's a bit of charm, but kids are really the only ones who are going to get much out of it. At its core, it's yet another animated road trip movie, and it follows that familiar formula pretty closely. Like I said, it feels a bit reminiscent of The Croods, and it features a villain that oddly feels similar to Doc Hopper from the Muppet movie. The first half doesn't have much going on, and the main conflict, as thin as it is, doesn't really kick in until the second half. There's also a subplot introduced early on about one of the ducklings having a crush on another duckling, but it barely affects the story. That character shows up again near the end, but by that point it's easy to forget it was even a thing. The humor leans much more towards younger kids. It's not necessarily lowbrow, but it's mostly slapstick and not something adults really gravitate toward. That said, what the film lacks in story and humor, it makes up for in animation. It has the distinct Illumination style, but it's still very expressive, energetic, and polished. It's also an extremely clean kids movie. Honestly, it feels more like a G-rated film. I'm not sure why it's rated PG, but this is not my first choice to watch for an Illumination movie. It's just perfectly harmless and cute, but not one of my go-to movies outside of watching it for a ranking. Number 12, Despicable Me 4. As someone who actually defends the Minions prequels and even found them somewhat charming, when I say I did not like this one, you know it wasn't good. The main issue here is what I call the Iron Man 2 problem, or in the case of Illumination, the Secret Life of Pets 2 problem. It feels like they had way too many ideas and couldn't commit to just one or two, so they tried to do all of them. There's a plot about the main villain who's very underdeveloped. There's a storyline about turning the Minions into superheroes, which feels like a rehash of the Mutant Minions of Despicable Me 2. There's a subplot about a hairstylist wanting revenge on Gru's wife, and there's another plotline where Gru is forced to turn this little girl to be a villain. The movie jumps between all of these so quickly that it honestly feels like episodes of a TV show that were edited together as a movie. And the humor is either more of the same stuff we've already seen in the previous films, or feels straight up derivative of other animated movies. Gru has a baby now, and the antics it's going to get it to feel very Jack from The Incredibles. There's even a dated joke about the Honey Badger Don't Carry Me, which came out 15 years ago. It just makes the movie feel like it's trying way too hard to appeal to kids. And the villain's motivation is honestly so baffling that once you're really just sitting there thinking, wait, really? That's it? Previous villains in the series were silly, but at least they were interesting. This one just isn't. And to make things worse, he's barely in the movie. He shows up at the beginning, disappears for most of it, and then comes back to the last 20 minutes. so he ends up feeling very underdeveloped. It's a movie with bad pacing, a thin plot, and underdeveloped characters, and I actually forgot that this movie existed and what it was about until I did my research to make this Illumination ranking. Oh yeah, there's a fourth Despicable Me. What was that one about again? Oh, it's the one with the baby. That's how little an effect it had on me. Number 11, The Grinch. The animation is delightfully exaggerated. It feels like it's pulled straight out of the original book. The colors and designs really match the classic Doctor Seuss style, and casting Benedict Cumberbatch as the Grinch is a surprisingly great choice. That being said, the movie does run into a pretty common problem. Trying to stretch a 20-page book into a 90-minute film. There just isn't enough plot there, so you end up with a lot of filler. There's this added storyline about Cindy Lou trying to capture Santa, and honestly, it's just not that interesting. I never really got that invested in her relationship with her mom. Some of the jokes also feel like they're trying a little too hard, even when they don't fully land. And the Grinch himself doesn't really come off as all that evil, or at least not as mean as he is in the original cartoon. You just feel like he's kind of grouchy. I think the movie would have worked better if they leaned more into his nastiness early on. But at the end of the day, it's still a better version than the one with Jim Carrey. This one feels more genuine, while that one is a bit more cynical. Number 10, Secret Life of Pets. This movie follows basically the same plot template as Toy Story, and that's kind of the biggest issue. You've got the favorite pet or favorite toy feels like they're going to replace dynamic, the jealousy, getting lost, having to work together to get back home, it all feels very familiar. And while that structure works, it also makes the movie feel a lot less original than it should be, especially given how fun the premise can be. Because honestly, I think this movie had a much better version of itself sitting right there. This really should have been an anthology film, just exploring the wacky, chaotic, and hilarious things pets get into when their owners aren't home. The opening 10 minutes are easily the best part of the movie. Seeing all the different pets, their personalities, their routines, the weird little things they do, that's where the concept really shines. If the entire movie had leaned more into that, it could have been something special. Just a series of escalating, interconnected mini-stories inside one apartment building or neighborhood. That's where the creativity is. Instead, it pivots into a more standard road trip adventure story, and that's where it starts to lose some of its identity. It becomes less about a secret of the pets and more about another animated road trip movie. That said, the movie isn't without its highlights. Kevin Hart as the villain Snowball absolutely steals the show. He brings so much energy, chaos, and personality to the character that every scene with him instantly becomes more entertaining. He's easily the most memorable part of the film. The animation is also solid. It has that bright, colorful Illumination style, and the environments feel lively and detailed. But at the end of the day, this feels like a lot of movies with the best potential. The premise is fantastic, the setup is strong, but it's a little too safe. It's still a fun watch, especially for kids, but it could have been so much more if it had fully committed to its concept instead of just falling back on a familiar formula. Number 9, Secret Life of Pets 2. To some degree, it's slightly better than the first movie because it does lean more into that anthology-style structure, but at the same time, it's also kind of its biggest weakness. The movie feels less like a cohesive story, and we're like 3 separate episodes of a TV show stitched together. Each storyline has its moments, but the overall flow just isn't very smooth. The addition of Harrison Ford brings a nice bit of dry humor, and honestly, I wish the movie had used him more. He's one of the highlights whenever he's on screen. At its core, it's a very sweet movie about pets and their relationships with their humans. There's a lot of heart, and it definitely works in its favor. But the plot really starts to fall apart toward the end. It goes so off the wall and over the top that it becomes hard to suspend your disbelief, even for a movie about talking pets. And it's frustrating because it didn't really need to go in that direction. The first 2 acts are fairly simple and straightforward, but by the 3rd act, it feels like the movie completely loses its footing and turns into something else entirely. I did laugh a couple of times, but overall, this is definitely more of a kids' movie than something adults are going to get much out of. Number 8, Minions. I know most people really don't like the Minion movies, but I don't think it's that bad. Yeah, it can get annoying at times, but at the same time, there are some genuinely funny moments in here. There's a great joke where a mad scientist has a bunch of clones of himself, and one of them accidentally kills the original, which causes all of them to disappear. It's dark, unexpected, and actually really clever. There's also a scene where the minions are in a dungeon, but none of the torture devices work on them. That whole sequence leans heavily into visual comedy, and it works surprisingly well. And Sandra Bullock is the villain and brings a fun energy to the movie. She has some really entertaining moments throughout. That said, the film can definitely overstay its welcome at times, and the minions themselves can be a bit much in large doses. But overall, I still find it entertaining. It's not great, but it's a lot more enjoyable than people give it credit for. Number 7, the Lorax. The Lorax has a message that's very heavy-handed, like to the point where even something like James Cameron might say it needs a little more subtlety. But honestly, as far as Doctor Seuss adaptations go, this is still one of the better ones. There are some pretty bizarre casting choices, though. Zac Efron and Taylor Swift both feel like they were cast more because they were popular rather than because they were perfect fits for the roles. That being said, Danny DeVito as the Lorax is perfect casting. He brings a lot of humor and personality to the character. The supporting cast of forest animals gets some solid laughs, and the songs are genuinely great. They're catchy and memorable, and one of the highlights of the whole movie. The third act does feel a bit rushed, and the message isn't exactly subtle, but overall, this is still one of the more charming Dr. Seuss adaptations. At the very least, unlike the live-action Cat in the Hat or Grinch, you can tell they were genuinely trying to capture the spirit of the original book. Number 6, Despicable Me 2. On one hand, I do think it expands on what worked in the first movie. Giving Gru a partner with Lucy and watching that relationship develop into something romantic is a really fun direction. It adds a new layer to his character, especially when you try to see him balance being a good father to his adopted daughters while figure out this new chapter of his life. And honestly, Lucy is a great addition. She brings a lot of energy to the movie and plays off Gru really well. But at the same time, the plot is kind of all over the place. It jumps between ideas not really grounding any of them, and it never feels as focused or emotionally strong as the first film. The villain is fine, but not especially memorable, and the overall story just doesn't come together in a satisfying way. And the movie really overdoes it with the minions. They were great in smaller doses in the first film, but here it feels like the movie leans on them way too heavily. Instead of enhancing the story, they start to take it over, and not always in the best way. That said, there's still a lot to enjoy. The humor works more often than not, the animation is bright and energetic, and the emotional core, especially with Gru and his family, still lands in a meaningful way. So while it is a little bit of a step down from the first movie, it's still a fun watch, just a little bit of a messier one. Number 5, Minions: The Rise of Gru. How much you enjoyed this film would depend on how big of a Despicable Me and Minions fan you are. For me, who's someone who likes all these movies and thinks they're all pretty solid, with the exception of Despicable Me 4, I had fun with it. I thought the plot was a bit stronger than the first Minions film, this time making Gru essentially the main character, and keeping the Minions a supporting humor, though there are also quite a few scenes where the Minions are the focus, perhaps for a bit too long. But ultimately, as the title The Rise of Gru implies, the main focus of the story is Gru, and what inspired him to become a supervillain. The film was delightfully wacky, providing all the Three Stooges-type cartoon gags you come to expect from these films. The animation is vibrant, the references to 1970s culture, since that's the decade this film takes place in, are fun. There are a lot of great visual gags, and though the plot could have flowed a bit better in some parts, it still has a lot of creativity, especially the third act, which I won't get into, but the third act of the film is highly creative and hilarious. And for somebody who's a diehard Despicable Me fan, there are a lot of throwback references to things that become important in the other films, since this is a prequel. I thought the supervillain team who are the antagonists of this film were all clever. The names are all very clever puns, and they really roll with it. If you're a huge fan of Despicable Me, you'll probably enjoy this film. You know exactly what you're getting. If you're someone who's getting tired of the franchise, it probably won't do much for you. But as for me, I thought it was hilarious, creative, and entertaining, though a bit familiar. Number 4, Despicable Me 3. It feels like it actually learned from some of the mistakes of the second movie, especially when it comes to the minions. This time they're used much more in moderation, which really helps. They're still funny, but they don't completely take over the movie the way they did in the second film. It feels more balanced, and that alone makes it something to watch. But the biggest missed opportunity here is the villain. Balthazar Brad is such a great concept. The former child star is still mentally stuck in the 80s. That's genuinely funny, and visually the movie leans into it with the music, the outfits, and gadgets, but it never fully commits to pushing that idea as far as it can go. He ends up feeling underused, which is frustrating because it easily could have been one of the more memorable villains in the series. Instead, the movie spends time on side plots that don't really add much, like Agnes searching for a real unicorn. It just feels like filler that takes time away from the stronger parts of the story, and they could have spent that time developing the villain more. That said, there is still a lot to like. The animation is as polished as ever, the humor lands more consistently than in the second film, and the core story, especially Gru trying to figure out who he is now that he's not a villain anymore, actually has some nice emotional weight to it. So it's a good movie, it's fun, it's more focused than Despicable Me 2, and it shows real improvement. I just can't help but feel like it could have been even better if it used its time more wisely, especially when it comes to fully committing to such a cool villain concept. Number 3, Despicable Me. A genuinely charming, heartfelt movie that really can be enjoyed by everyone. It's silly enough for kids, but also has a surprising amount of emotional depth that can really hit for adults. That balance is something the later films don't always get right, but this one absolutely does. This is the Despicable Me movie that feels like it has the most care and intention behind it. Everything from the story to the characters feels focused and purposeful. Gru's arc going from a supervillain to someone who lives to love and care for his adopted daughters is what really carries the film. It's simple but effective, and more importantly, feels earned. The plot is fun, and it's easy to follow, the characters are memorable, and the humor is really sharp. It's not just random gags, it's built into the story. And when the movie wants to hit you emotionally, it does. It's not afraid to tug on the heartstrings, and those moments land in a sincere way. And the animation still holds up. It has that distinct style, but it's expressive, energetic, full of personality. And I think 20 years from now, people look back on it as one of the classics. It's funny, it's heartfelt, and it works on every level. Number 2, Mario. It took 12 years, but Illumination finally did it. They made a movie that is even better than their first outing, the original Despicable Me. This is a full-on crowd pleaser. It's the kind of movie that pretty much anyone can enjoy, even if you've never played a Mario game. The world is bright, vibrant, and genuinely fun to spend time in. Everything from the environments to the characters is incredibly well animated and expressive without going too over the top. It feels lively but still controlled. Now, the movie's narrative does move pretty fast, but that makes sense when you consider the source material. The Mario games have always had very simple stories. Bowser kidnaps Peach, Mario goes to rescue her, repeat that over and over for 40 years. There's not a ton of complex narrative to pull from, but that simplicity is also part of its charm. The movie embraces that instead of overcomplicating things. And when the trailers first dropped, people were really divided on Chris Pratt as Mario. Personally, I think he did a solid job. Every now and then you can hear his real voice slip through, but it's never distracting enough that it ruins it. The voice acting overall is actually really strong, and the standout, no question, is Jack Black as Bowser. He completely steals the show. He brings so much personality to the character, and what's impressive is how much it changes his voice. When he's speaking, it doesn't just sound like Jack Black, it feels like Bowser. The only time it really sounds like him is during the musical moments, but even those are fun and memorable. The only performance that didn't really fully work for me was Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong. It's not bad, it just sounds exactly like Seth Rogen being Seth Rogen, and that makes it a little hard to fully buy into the character. I do have a couple issues, though, mainly the use of pop songs. There are moments like the training sequence in the Mushroom Kingdom where Mario is learning how the world works, and visually it feels like you're watching a Mario platformer come to life. It's awesome, but instead of using the iconic music from the game, the movie throws in modern pop songs, and it just doesn't fit. It pulls you out of the experience a bit, especially when the perfect music was already right there. That said, those issues are pretty minor in the grand scheme of things. Overall, the film is exactly what it needs to be. A fun, energetic, crowd-pleasing adventure for all ages. And in first place is Mario Galaxy. This is exactly what a great sequel is supposed to be. Instead of just repeating the same formula as the first film, it expands everything. The story, the characters, and especially the world, and it feels bigger, bolder, and more imaginative. Like I said, one of my biggest issues with the original Mario was the use of pop songs. They felt out of place and pulled me out of the experience. That issue is completely fixed with this film. It fully leans into the musical score, and it makes a huge difference. The orchestral, space-inspired soundtrack gives the movie a sense of scale and wonder that perfectly matches the galaxy-hopping adventure. It feels cinematic in a way the first movie didn't quite reach. And speaking of adventure, the movie goes all in. It's a full-on galaxy-trotting journey packed with creativity. Fans of the Super Mario games are going to have a blast spotting familiar planets. And even beyond that, the film introduces new worlds that feel just as imaginative and fitting within the Mario universe. It's a smorgasbord of Nintendo Easter eggs, and you can tell the filmmakers really love this franchise. At times, the movie even dips into full-on space opera territory. There's a sequence on a casino planet that feels heavily inspired by Star Wars The Last Jedi. It was very reminiscent of Canto Bight, with a larger-than-life villain who gives off serious Jabba the Hutt vibes. It's a surprising influence, but it actually works, adding a fun layer of genre blending to the film. What really elevates the movie, though, is its heart. At its core, it is a positive pro-family story. It emphasizes connection, loyalty, and growth in a way that feels genuine and uplifting without being preachy. That emotional grounding keeps the film from just being spectacle. It gives it meaning. The comedy is another standout. The jokes themselves are solid, but what really sells them is the animation. The characters are so expressive that even a simple reaction can make a moment hilarious. There are times the humor doesn't come from the punchline itself, but from how the characters respond, and that's where the animation truly shines. And I have no idea why this movie got a PG. It's a G-rated film through and through. There's no profanity, innuendo, or anything otherwise questionable, just pure family-friendly entertainment. At the end of the day, the Super Mario Galaxy movie builds on everything that worked in the first movie and fixes what didn't. It's bigger, more emotional, more visually creative, and more confident in its identity. This is what a great sequel should be, and it comes in at number 1. So go ahead and share of the Illumination films and list the ones you've seen, and I'll see you next time.